Welcome back to Marathon Phoenix Commentary. My name is Ryoko TK, and we're going to be discussing episode 23 here, which is the beginning of chapter 6. So this video, of course, is going to be 2 levels. The first is Precipice of Madness, which is technically an exposition level. Even though it is an exposition level, as you can see, there are monsters. There are quite a few monsters. Plot-wise, this is where the Four begin to invade the Renegade Citadel. This is the end of the game that we're approaching here. And you were helping make this happen in the previous chapter. So the first couple levels of this chapter are massive battle levels. And one thing that you can see, if you look out the windows, you can see huge swarms of Four and Renegades fighting each other. You'll see a little bit right here, actually. No, not here. If I turn around. Right there. Lots and lots and lots of mans fighting each other. It just gives a cool backdrop to this level. So it's exposition through action. Then clever. That's the end of that level. This is the first real level of Chapter 6. This is Holy Wars. And let me just say, the real Dark Souls starts here. That is the first rocket launcher that is not in a secret level, by the way. The first 3 levels of this chapter are all non-linear, and most of them have relatively simple objectives. You're supposed to be helping the Four fight their way deeper into the Renegade Citadel. And in this first mission, what you're doing is you need to open up several large gateways to provide access deeper into the Citadel. So you need to find 3 switches that open 3 big doors, and then proceed through the big doors. It's a non-linear level, but there are several different routes, and each route leads to a different switch that you need to hit. So it's one of those levels where we will visit pretty much every part of the level. This level is kind of interesting. It's not really my favorite. It's just sort of wholly mediocre, I guess, is how I would describe it. There's nothing wrong with it. Earlier in Phoenix's development cycle, back when this was the Gray Incident Special Edition, there were very few battle levels. I think there were only a handful, and I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 in the Gray Incident as well. I really can't remember. But it was not something that was played up that much, and as a result, this level was kind of more of a treat than it is now, just because it was, pretty much the first major time when you would see all these dudes fighting each other and just being really chaotic. And it's supposed to be really cool. And unfortunately, I kind of blew that wad a lot earlier in Phoenix with the Count of Tuscany, and also several other levels like Red Eye Express and Exercise in Excess and all that stuff. So this level's gimmick in that regard is old hat. But to make up for that, of course, the fights are much, much harder. And a big reason for why Chapter 6 is so much harder than the others is because health is very limited. Most of the time you're going to be relegated to red recharges. And let me just tell you, red health does not get you very far in Phoenix on Total Carnage. Catching a stray rocket from a cyborg, or a burst of fire from a defender, or even a blue trooper's grenades, that'll kill you pretty quickly. So death comes very, very rapidly in this chapter, and I died quite a lot on this level as a result. This level does feature a lot of big architecture, kind of like the Count of Tuscany, and it's important to know that in terms of real time, I made this level much, much earlier than that one. This is one of the earlier new levels for Phoenix, actually. And it's kind of cool because I made it off the grid. A few times I've talked about how I am pretty reliant on the map grid. But I made this level off the grid, so you see a lot more curves, and you see a lot of kind of strange angles, rather than the usual sort of squares and 45-degree angles that I tend to rely on so much. Which kind of gives this level a pretty cool feel. Pretty cool architectural style. Looks a little primitive. Looks a little bit more like Marathon Infinity than Marathon 2, I guess. But I play a little bit with some shading. There's some really cool transitions between light and dark areas. And of course, lots of big architecture, which I am a fan of course. Kind of a cool way that this level is laid out. Like I said earlier, there are multiple routes to hit the multiple switches. And they all start by heading upstairs from that central building, and then it just sort of forks off from there. Because sometimes you have to unlock other doors to progress to the switches that you have to hit. And it all starts at that central building. And then it kind of leads to other buildings and higher ground and lower ground and a lot of stuff like that. This level does play on height difference a fair amount. Which I think is kind of cool, especially when you compare it to some of the previous levels in this game, like Into Sandy's City or Red Eye Express, which are fairly flat. And unfortunately, you kind of have to backtrack after you grab that secret. The way that this level is laid out, like I said earlier, it's a bunch of large structures, but there's a couple of big courtyards between them too. The first courtyard, of course, I did have to go through. That was that big fight leading up to the pattern buffer and the recharger. But there's another courtyard on the north side of the building, and I try to avoid that courtyard for the most part. As you've seen in this level, there are tons of enforcers on high ledges, and there are other enemies on high ledges, and lots of these defenders floating around and all that stuff. And being caught in this courtyard, the second courtyard, is a pretty bad position, not to mention it doesn't get you anywhere. There's nothing out there except a little bit of ammo. And it's just a very, very vulnerable position. See, okay, now I'm being harassed by a mother of all hunters down there, too. But the height difference plays a big role in the combat in this level. And this is one of my favorite rooms in the entire map, actually. Just the way that you kind of descend down this these stairs, and then you got enemies below you and enemies above you that are challenging you constantly. The change in height as you descend around the outside of this room, I actually think is executed pretty well. Not to mention, I think just the geometry of that room is really interesting, in sort of the combination of curves and sharp angles. And this is an enemy you'll see quite a lot more of in this chapter than you have in the past. The mother of all cyborgs, of course, is probably the single most dangerous enemy outside of maybe boss defenders. And it's just a combination of their high health, which means you can't just burst them down, and their explosive attacks, which are very strong. And when you couple it with a weird geometry like all those columns in the space behind me, getting caught by a stray rocket, it might not hit you, but if it hits a wall near you, you'll still take damage. So that makes it really important to be aware of your surroundings as you fight these guys. And the Juggernauts, the Renegade Juggernauts, are the same way. So each time you fight them, it's sort of a different sort of plays out a little differently based on the terrain that you're fighting them on. And I think that's pretty interesting. But of course, they are just highly dangerous, and this is supposed to be a really hard chapter. So I use these dangerous enemies more often. The central part of this level, well, aside from that tower with the red recharger that I keep retreating to, the central part of this level is this big trench that runs along the northern part of the level. And that's sort of your objective. You have to open all the doors in the trench in order to progress, to make progress to the next level. And kind of like in other levels, a level like the Count of Tuscany, for example, I'll make a key part of the architecture something that stands out and stands up, like the 3 towers. You kind of go behind them, you go in front of them, there are enemies in them, and then eventually you kind of make your way up into the towers. And that's sort of like a centerpiece part of the level. This level sort of inverts that by making it a trench that you keep going above. You keep being able to look down into it before making your move finally through it. Just sort of a cool little inversion on that trope, but I think it still makes it stand out pretty neat. And in this case, I had a lot of enemies already spawned inside the tunnels, rather than having them teleport in, so you can kind of see what you're coming up to. But I have now I've hit the 3 main switches, and I can enter the corridor at long last, and finally finish up this level. This section that I'm in, there's a one-way door, kind of a neat little trick, I guess, that I use, is that in order to access that control switch, you kind of cross through this tunnel, and it just looks like an ordinary tunnel, or like a little passageway, but it goes above the door that you're opening. And when you hit the switch, of course, the door raises up, but it raises up into the corridor that you just passed through. So you're literally walking on top of the door. That's the image that it's supposed to give you. And of course, once you raise the door, it locks you out. You can't go back. You have to go forward. So it's a one-way door, and then there's a ledge that you jump down. So once you pass through that section, you're pretty much stuck. And I kind of had to revisit that area, in a sense, just because there's a secret in that area. So if you missed the secret your first time passing through that area, you couldn't go back and get it. So I had to put in a second secret on this level that leads back to the first secret, so you can still get that skull. And you'll see that secret momentarily. We're just coming up onto the last couple major fights of this level. Since you can pretty much freely access this recharger at any point in the level, a lot of the fights can kind of be cheesed, and whenever you start to run low on health, just retreat, walk back to the recharger, and heal up, and you don't really lose anything for it. And I try to make this video as interesting as possible to watch, so I try not to scum the saves too badly. And as a result, it made this fight really, really hard. Because, of course, you have so little health going into it. Red health is, once again, not very much. And the combination of the enforcers at range and then the hunters kind of pressing in on you makes this fight pretty challenging. And then afterwards, there's a bunch of troopers that you have to fight. And if I get hit by a grenade, or if I eat even a part of this guy's blast, I'm toast. So it's pretty intense, and it's pretty unforgiving if you don't want to be a dirty cheeser. What you saw right there is the explosion glitch. If an exploding projectile detonates on a line between 2 polygons, it doesn't do any damage. I'm pretty sure that's how it works anyway. And that's kind of significant because in earlier versions of Phoenix, the crossbow, rather than firing a small spread of pellets, it fired an exploding shell, which I thought was really, really cool, except half the time it wouldn't do any damage because it would hit an enemy that was just conveniently standing on top of a line. And it just sucked. It was really irritating. So I changed it to that sort of shotgun spread. And even though it's much less cool than it used to be, it is at least, functional, which I guess is more important. defenders are just no match for the flamethrower. They just get stun locked, and there's nothing they can do. Or end cannon, rather, not flamethrower. This was the secret that I had to add in late in order to make the other part of the level accessible again. Anyway, that's the end of the level. That's going to be the end of this video. The next episode will cover the level Intervals, which is the hardest level in the whole game. I'm not really joking right now.